the first Sunday in this Biblical Stories That Stay With You Forever series, we talked about Moses and the Red Sea and the theme of deliverance. And next week it was David and Goliath and the courage factor. Last week, Queen Esther and her courage to step up and save her own people from extinction. And now we come to the story of Jonah and the big fish. Now, the story of Jonah is a story of a person in need of a huge attitude adjustment. It starts out with the Lord's directive, as you have heard from Billy and Jordan, to go to Jonah, to go to the city of Nineveh and turn those people around. Raise them up from their dens of iniquity. They have fallen into a total spiritual disrepair. But Jonah ignores God's plea for help, and he goes the opposite direction. He boards the ship for a city called Tarshish, and suddenly a great storm sweeps in, and the sailors on the ship suspect it's Jonah's fault because he has abandoned God, and therefore the wrath of God is descending upon them all. Jonah suggests to the sailors on the ship that they throw him overboard, and maybe that will take care of the problem, which they do, and the raging sea suddenly becomes calm. A big fish then swallows Jonah, and he lies in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And all of a sudden, Jonah has second thoughts about his rejection of the Lord. Who wouldn't if you were in the belly of a fish? And repents, and the fish, as the story goes, spits him out on the shore. And then Jonah makes the trek to the city of Nineveh, and he fulfills the mission of converting the Ninevites. And then the Lord, who had threatened to destroy this city for its wayward ways, spares it from destruction. This displeased Jonah because he thought, by golly, that city deserves it. Then Jonah got down on himself, and he even said, I'm so angry, I wish I were dead. The Lord's last line in this short book in the Old Testament, I believe, is the best line. Should I not have concern for this great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left? Well, what we have here are two opposing attitudes. Jonah with limited vision, God with unlimited vision. As we understand today, on this World Communion Sunday, as we celebrate with 1 billion other Christians across the world. Jonah, as I said before, is a story of attitude or lack thereof. Attitude toward God, attitude toward oneself, attitude toward those who are different from you. It's also a story about how inwardness can corrupt the soul. Now consider how much better Jonah's life would have been if he had consented to the Lord's initial call for help. That if he would have reached out to others willingly and lovingly, and then embraced the city's spiritual renaissance. Instead, Jonah couldn't see beyond his own backyard, his parochialism getting the best of him in the end. You know what they say? Attitude is everything, and we see signs of it everywhere. One of our members a while ago, when commenting on the weather forecast for the next day, said, there's a 70% chance that the sun will shine today. It was a breath of fresh air to hear it stated that way, instead of the normal weather report, which would have said there's a 30% chance that it will rain today. Instead of starting out with the possibility of rain, she started out with the possibility of sunshine. We've always known that when you start with a negative, the mind tends to trend that way. But when you start with the positive, the negative takes a back seat. As the saying goes, attitude determines your altitude. Mountain climber Eric Arnold of Rotterdam, who had scaled some of the greatest mountains in the world, didn't make it on his last climb, dying from oxygen deprivation on his way down Mount Everest just last year. But prior to making that climb, he said about the risk that he's always taken in life. It isn't a death wish, he said, but kind of a zest for life. And apparently, getting a little closer to the edge of life makes life even more beautiful for me. We know attitude is often the difference between success and failure, between a growing church and a declining one, between a successful corporation and an unsuccessful one, between a great school district and a mediocre one, between a top-flight university and an also-ran. Your attitude can make the difference in someone else's day. If you greet people cheerfully every morning, you can turn their day around. If you're dour, it can sour their day. You can have all the talent in the world, but if your attitude suffers, your gifts and talents can be easily wasted. How many times have high school yearbooks, for instance, been wrong about the person most likely to succeed because their attitudes really never matched up to their aptitudes? Just because you're a 5-star recruit doesn't mean you're going to be successful on the field or on the court unless your attitude is commensurate with your talent. I remember some of the guys in my college fraternity who far exceeded expectations because their attitudes compensated for whatever talent they didn't have. Attitude can make a difference in how you view yourself, of course. Psychologists have talked about the psychological effect of a good attitude. Medical studies have shown how a good attitude can improve your health and even add some days to your life, or years to your life. A positive change in attitude can help stave off depression. The more one focuses on the good and the beautiful, the more one looks forward to the next day. Former Chrysler chairman and the force behind the creation of the Ford Mustang and the Chrysler minivan, Lee Iacocca, in his book entitled Where Have All the Leaders Gone?, writes in one of the chapters about 3 men who had the most influence on his life, one of which was his father, who emigrated to America from Italy, get this, at the age of 12, all by himself. Can you imagine leaving your family and your homeland, taking a boat across the ocean, finding a job, and then finding a place to live, all at the age of 12, all on your own? You talk about being resourceful. He ended up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, his father did, and ultimately opened up a hot dog restaurant, which is still in operation today. Mr. Iacocca spoke glowingly of his father's optimistic attitude. He said, no matter how bad things got, my dad always found the silver lining. I never knew the meaning of the word impossible. It wasn't spoken in our home. The attitude is more than just a motivational psychological issue. It is a spiritual issue, as Jonah never discovered. Good attitudes help others. God said, let light shine out of darkness. You know, as Christians, we're ministers of a new covenant. We're ministers of a new way of looking at things. The old is gone and the new is here. In days of darkness, this is when the Christian shines. He doesn't let discouraging times take down his attitude. In other words, as Christians, we are called to rise above difficult times and to not allow bad days to get the best of our attitudes. For then we become too much like the world and less like Christ. And we use Christ's example as our guide. Could you imagine how much of Christ's attitude could have quickly gone south if he had succumbed to the world's values on how to behave if things weren't going the way you wanted them to go? One who was mocked, scorned, beaten. If he were to play by the world's rules, he would have had every reason to complain. He had every reason to declare himself a victim and to give up. But as God said, your light must shine in darkness. Again, a lesson that Jonah never learned. Now you see, in the worldly definition of things, Christ had a bad day every day. He didn't own anything. He didn't have a house. He had no retirement plan. He was questioned. He was doubted at every turn of the road. He had no family to go home to. He didn't even have a place to lay his head. Yet his attitude remained astoundingly hopeful and optimistic. Friends, I believe when you accept Christ into your heart, as Paul said, the old is gone. It's gone. The new takes over. And this means a new attitude. Your light will shine in darkness. English theologian Oswald Chambers wrote, when we are born again, the Holy Spirit begins to work his new creation in us. And there will come a time when there is not a bit of the old order left anymore. The old attitude to things goes away, and all things are God's. Christian life calls us to demonstrate a good attitude in everything we do. And by doing this, we become, as Jesus said, the lamp that shines for everybody in the whole house. And Paul tells us in Philippians, your attitude should be that of the same of Jesus Christ. And so it is. Your attitude will determine your altitude.